Thank you to everyone for tuning into this session of the World Trade Center Utah webinar series. We're grateful to Varex Imaging and Dorsey and Whitney for jumping in to partner with us on today's webinar, and especially for Troy and Matt for taking time out of their busy schedules to help all of us learn what's in the CARES Act, what federal programs and resources are available to our mid-sized companies. Before jumping in to today's topic and before Matt and Troy break down the CARES Act for us, I wanted to give a quick update on what we're doing here in Utah to help mid-sized companies, those companies between 500 and 10,000 employees, what resources are available, what you can expect to see happening here over the next week or two as we start to broaden our focus from the initial effort that has been very much on our small businesses to one that is broader based to support mid-sized companies here across the state of Utah. I know that there are many companies tuning in from outside of Utah. One, you can be jealous that you're not here in Utah because we're doing some really cool stuff here in the state of Utah. And two, I know that states are working very aggressively across the country to operationalize these federal programs and to maximize the number of companies that benefit in their states. So reach out to your state government offices, Governor's Office of Economic Development, and I'm sure that there are similar programs and resources available to you as well. Here in the state of Utah, I thought it would be helpful to provide a little bit of context around the Economic Response Task Force that Governor Herbert has stood up and the World Trade Center Utah is very proud to be a part of. The task force is working to minimize the economic dip that we experience from COVID-19, just as our healthcare professionals and officials are focusing on flattening the curve of COVID-19. On the task force, there are several different committees, one of which is a federal committee that World Trade Center Utah was asked to organize and to chair. We have convened all of the congressional delegation offices here from the state of Utah, all of our federal partners that have offices here in Utah, so the SBA, Commerce Department, FDIC based off of their rep in San Francisco, as well as Customs and Border Protection, DHS, and others who are here on the ground, who know the federal agencies and bureaucracies very well, but also know Utah very well. We've also included key state partners and local partners on this federal committee. The federal committee has been focused on, number one, maximizing the number of Utah businesses that benefit from federal programs and resources. Like I mentioned, the focus has been on small business, but mid-sized companies absolutely fall within our mandate, and it's something that we are thinking through how we can plug in and support. We are accomplishing that in a couple different ways. One, by pushing out information. Anybody can go to coronavirus.utah.gov/business. There you will see a comprehensive overview of all the federal programs and resources that exist that can benefit Utah companies right now. Some are limited to small businesses, but the majority of them are open for businesses of all sizes. So I encourage you to go to that website and you will see rich resources, distilled down information so you can quickly see what the programs are, who are eligible for them, and what you need to do to benefit from them. We have also organized a rapid response team. We recognized very quickly that there would be a significant bottleneck with SBA in terms of responding to requests from businesses trying to understand how to participate in the various stimulus programs. The focus of the rapid response team right now has been small businesses. We organized it just late last week. We now have 51 volunteers from about 15 different organizations who are plugging in to be a part of this rapid response team. And they have been able to help, at this point, more than 600 Utah businesses. They are charged with not just passing along information, but plugging in and providing solutions and helping to solve problems for our businesses to reach out. Again, the focus right now has been small business. Over the next week and a half, we anticipate broadening the scope to help mid-sized companies and others who are trying to participate in these federal programs. You can engage the rapid response team by going to coronavirus.utah.gov/business. Right there at the top of the page, you'll see a link where you can submit an inquiry or a request for help. You fill out information about your business, the nature of the issue that you need help with, and then somebody from the rapid response team will engage. And again, we'll stay with you through the process to help solve problems for you and not just pass information, because we're all suffering from information overload at this point. So please check the website, check it regularly. We will keep it up to date, and we'll make sure to get more information up there for mid-sized companies. Separately, putting back on my World Trade Center Utah hat, I want to make sure that everybody tuning in is aware of the programs and services that we are recalibrating to help support businesses right now. We run a number of grant programs that typically apply for small businesses, although even if you have more than 500 employees, there are some that may apply for you. We also do free consultations, free market research. We do provide trade and investment services. And so if you are looking for capital right now, investment partners, please reach out. We help match investors with investment opportunities. If you are looking for connecting with people just about anywhere in the world, we have a great global network that we can tap into. So we do a lot of B2B matchmaking. So if you're looking for a new supplier in China, or you're having challenges with your existing supplier, you need some help there, please reach out. We can go to our network and help connect you with the people you need to connect with. If you're looking for buyers, again, investors or others, please let us know so we can plug in and be supportive to you as you go through these really challenging times. We've also done a series of webinars. If you haven't been in the loop, you can go to our website, WTCUtah.com, sign up to be on our distribution list. We've done, just in the past 2 weeks, 8 or 9 different webinars like the one we're having today, and we encourage you to participate and tune in, because we will keep doing these to make sure that businesses have the information that they need to make smart decisions, and then that we can plug in and support through our programs and services. So with that, we're excited for Troy and Matt to be with us today. Troy Keller is of counsel at Dorsey and Whitney, and Matt Martinez is a senior corporate counsel at Varex Imaging. 2 phenomenal players here in the Utah business community. We're very, very grateful, Troy, for everything that you've done to partner with us on several events and the expertise that you share so generously with so many different Utah companies. And Matt, Varex is one of the best Utah companies. Love working with Varex and doing everything we can to plug in support. And so I will turn it over to Troy, who I think will kick things off for us today. And Matt will be a part of that. At the end, we'll have a Q&A session. So feel free to submit your questions, and Troy will manage that and make sure that we get this information to you. And then we will be sure to send out this slide deck to everybody, so you have this as a resource moving forward. So again, thanks for being with us. And Troy, over to you.
Great. Miles, thanks so much. Thanks for your leadership and for this platform and for all that you've been doing for companies across Utah. And as you mentioned, today we'll be talking directly to the companies and nonprofits that are in that mid-sized category. And it's not a small category. It's the 500 to 10,000 employees, and that covers that covers a lot of territory. Just by way of a little more introduction, so on my end, I focus on corporate law matters and government relations strategies, and in today's topic, those two areas have really converged. And Matt is an attorney I admire. He's worked in-house for a long time at Varex, and I understand how complex that can be. Matt, do you want to talk for a second about your responsibilities there at Varex?
Yeah, hi everybody. I do corporate securities, M&A work, and kind of treasury responsibilities here at Varex. And we're one of the largest independent X-ray components manufacturers. So we make X-ray tubes and digital detectors and send them out all across the world.
And Matt has been focused on this issue for a while, ever since the crisis started, and as well, I think, well placed to give some thoughtful advice on how they've been thinking about it inside of Varex and Matt himself. We'll go through the program. We have a few slides. If you have questions, feel free to send them through the chat feature as we go, and we'll if we see those and are nimble enough, we'll try to answer them as we go. If not, we'll hopefully have some time at the end. If we don't get to your question, though, we will try to respond afterwards via email or with a reach out. And if a question occurs to you afterwards, feel free to reach out to Matt or me directly, or just to respond to the World Trade Center invitation you received, and they will also get the questions where they belong. So moving on to the next slide here. Okay, so by way of quick background, what we're talking about today if you look at the top of the slide, you see this $500 billion appropriation, which was part of Title IV, economic stabilization piece of the act. Now, this is different. This bucket is different than the $349 billion that was put in place, for example, for the PPP, and which has been a lot in the news and you've heard a lot about. This $500 billion is separate, so it's not competing with that money, but it does have some designations as to what it's used for. So if you see the breakdown here, $25 billion is meant directly for the air carriers, $4 billion to cargo carriers, $17 billion to national security businesses. That still leaves a huge bucket that's somewhat discretionary for Treasury and the Federal Reserve Board to use to support companies and businesses through a variety of programs. That $454 billion they can use that for direct loans to companies, or they can set up programs. And so one of those categories, one of those programs that was specifically described in the CARES Act was a mid-sized company loan program. And that'll be the focus of pretty much all of our discussion today. We will vary a little bit and give a few thoughts on what a stimulus 4 package might look like. But mostly we'll focus on this mid-sized company program. So to summarize a little bit, it's interesting when the program when the CARES Act first came out, there was nothing in it for mid-sized companies. It focused basically on the small business, which rightfully so, because they were they were hurting immediately. It focused on shoring up some of the big markets, the large investment grade commercial paper markets. There wasn't anything in it for the mid-sized companies. And Matt, I remember you mentioned you pointed that out early on in the process. And why did that catch your attention?
Yeah, I think it was there was a lot of focus on small business, a lot of focus on some of the larger companies, but there's a huge group of companies in the middle that were too big to take advantage of the SBA type programs and not big enough to kind of weather things on their own. And so getting some specific language in there for mid-sized companies, I think was a really good first step, and added a focus to a big group of companies that can also use some help during this time. Yeah,
I think that's well said, and a shout out to I know some of our representatives in Congress from Utah, who I know put some focus on that as well. So if any of them are on listening, thanks to them. This program, I think as we mentioned, it's available for companies between 500 and 10,000 employees. It's financed by the Fed, but the loans are issued by banks, and that will be important, as we will see, as we will talk about quite a bit. And Matt, I don't want to preview anything too much, but that is, how critical is that piece of it, that the loans will be managed by banks and not the Fed directly, as with some of the other pieces?
Yeah, I think that is a good thing, because what it'll allow is a lot of mid-sized companies to leverage their existing banking relationships to kind of get in under this program. I think there's pluses and minuses that maybe we'll talk about later, but overall, I think it's probably a good thing because we can use existing relationships.
Yeah, excellent. So here's what's great about the program. The headline is the interest rates are not higher than 2%, and no required payments on the principal or interest in the first 6 months or longer if Treasury agrees. So it is designed to be a program that helps companies stay liquid during this time of crisis. And on that first, on that headline, that would seem to provide that, and that is great. As we'll see, though, there are a few strings attached. These loans, as the program, as far as we know right now, and as we mentioned before, there is a lot of detail still to come. The Fed needs to put some, the Treasury specifically needs to put some detail around what this program will look like. But we do have some high-level guidance and requirements from the Congress layered on. And so those are, we'll just touch on a few of them here. Businesses need to be able to certify that they won't outsource or offshore jobs for the period of the loan plus 2 years. They won't abrogate or basically try to terminate collective bargaining agreements during this period, and they'll remain neutral in union organization. Moving over to the box there, just a couple we wanted to touch on there. One of the certifications is that the company needs to say that the loan is necessary to support ongoing operations due to the economic uncertainty. So that is a standard that is, you could look at it as stiff or you could look at it as easy. And Matt, what's your view? I know you've given it a lot of thought given your company's situation.
Yeah, I think this is one that will be, it obviously depends on how it's implemented, but I think most companies will be able to show that their operations, their businesses have gotten harder or more expensive because of the economic uncertainty. So I think this is one that most companies will be able to meet. And we just saw a question come in about when the loans will be issued and applications will be accepted. We'll talk a little bit about that later. The answer is Treasury is still coming up with the rules. They're hopeful, from what we've heard, hopefully by the end of the week we'll have some more detail.
Yeah, good. And that is, yeah, thanks, Matt. And that is the rumor that they'll be coming any day. We've heard that rumor last week as well. So I think we'll see when we see them. But it's important to I think move quickly as companies are being prepared. Another couple of items to mention here. This 90% requirement, there are two of them, and I keep saying requirement. These are again certifications, which is a little bit softer than a requirement, but nonetheless, I think is will be real real stipulations of the loans. Is that the recipient retain at least 90% of their workforce at full comp and benefits until September 30th. Now, it's unclear when the measurement date for starting that is. We assume it's the time from which you receive the loan. So if you're a company that's already reduced your workforce by 11%, that doesn't mean you won't qualify for this. In fact, I'm sure you still would, which is why they have the second requirement there that says that the company will certify that it intends to get back to at least 90% of the workforce that existed as of February 1st with full comp and benefits. Matt, that full comp and benefits is a little, sad. Companies are always changing their benefit and compensation programs in the ordinary course, and we'll certainly be doing so more now. Any concerns on your end with that language?
Yeah, I think this is one that is a little tricky, and they're going to have to work through, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. But obviously, all companies are looking at cash management strategies right now, and I think the goal of the program is to keep as many people as employed as possible. So if you just take one example, is stopping the company deferral or the company contribution on a 401k, is that cutting benefits? Would that make you ineligible? That's the type of thing that companies need to look at, but also hopefully Treasury will address in the regulations, because it wouldn't seem that would be the outcome we'd want, right? That we couldn't do those kind of cash management strategies and still take advantage of the program.
Yeah, and I would think Treasury has that flexibility. Clearly, they need to implement what Congress passed, but the definitions of these terms, will require some work by Treasury. So I think they will have some flexibility there. Okay, let's move on to the next slide here. Get my thing to, okay. So,
Troy, there was a question on that one that I think would be good to answer. The question is the 90% requirement in either or, meaning either retain 90% or bring back 90%? If not, seems like this would kick out businesses that suffer downturn and don't have work for 90%. Any thoughts?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure I completely follow that, but both of those requirements are in place. So you've got to keep what you have during the term of the loan, and then still get back to if it's different, you've still got to get back to 90% as of February 1. So it's kind of a multiple requirement there.
But the getting back to 90%, and remember, it's a certification, you have until 4 months after the economic emergency ends, right? So it's not saying you immediately have to bring back 90% of your workforce. At least that's how I read it.
No, that's exactly right. Sorry. Yes. Good. And in fact, the definition of when the public health emergency is ended is a little unclear. So we'll again, more details to come. So what other requirements could be applicable to these loans? There is some bit of a debate going on as to whether Section 4004 of the Act will apply. And this is the section that requires that companies who receive loans, certainly under the B1 through and 3 programs, again, going back to the air carriers and the air cargo, their executives are required to have their compensation capped to 2019 levels. And if they receive above $3 million in total comp in 2019, then there's some other restrictions that might even keep them a little bit below 2019 levels. It is unclear if that requirement, just from looking at the statute, some places it implies that it will apply to any program that's under that makes use of that $454 billion. But other places, for example, when it describes the mid-sized program specifically, it doesn't make reference to that. So to be honest, we just don't know if that'll be applicable. I personally don't think it will, but we'll see. Maybe a little more relevant to right now is our restrictions that banks may apply. As we mentioned earlier, this is a program that that Fed will rely on banks to implement. They'll certainly give instructions and requirements to banks, but there might be some leeway for banks, and you could see them wanting to layer on some things to protect themselves. Matt, is there anything here that would concern you?
Yeah, I think in order for this program to be effective, we've got to keep it as simple as possible and push the funds out, just like they're doing with the small business program. And so this is a risk, but I think hopefully Treasury will guide the banks on this and put some limitations on what the banks can add, would be my hope.
Yeah, good. Yeah, I agree. I think there's a risk that the program could be rolled out in a way that just isn't useful to companies that really need it, maybe even to companies that need it the most. But we'll get into some of that in a little more detail. Okay, so Matt, I know that Varex has thought a lot about, as we've talked and mentioned several times, that the program's details are still to come. I know that Varex has given that a lot of thought. You have yourself, and have even done a little bit of advocacy. I know a number of other companies have done some advocacy as well, sending to Treasury their thoughts on how the program needs to work in order to be useful for mid-sized companies in the real world. Do you want to take us through some of that thinking and your views on that?
Yeah, happy to. And I think the first thing I would say is the good news is that I do feel like Treasury and members of our federal delegation have really been open to listen to what companies need and to what we've been asking for. And I think they are taking it into account as they're crafting these rules. So hopefully that'll end up with a program that's more useful to mid-sized companies. And so on this side, we've just got a few things that we hope that Treasury will consider when putting these in. And the first one is really the program should be big enough or inclusive enough to cover companies in different situations, because there's obviously companies that have had demand drop off significantly, and they have different needs than other companies who maybe still have demand for their products or services, but because of social distancing or because of other reasons, operations are more expensive and less efficient. And so the program needs to accommodate both of those types of situations. The next one I think is critical for any kind of mid-sized business is that the program has to work with existing debt facilities, right? If the debt has to be secured or has to be senior or pari passu with existing debt, it's going to be really hard for a lot of companies to take advantage of this. And so Treasury hopefully is aware of that. We've made them aware of that. Others have obviously made them aware of that. And that leads into the next point. The Treasury really is going to have to support lenders and guide lenders on how to implement this. Because, if we need waivers or amendments to credit facilities, there's got to be some guidance on how Treasury expects that to happen and kind of on what terms and conditions. And then this last point we touched on before, every company currently should be looking at cash management and saving measures, right? And so things like deferring your 401k match, cutting back on ESPPs, salary cuts, temporary layoffs, all those types of actions, and doing those things shouldn't keep companies from participating in this program. Because as our understanding is, the goal is to keep people working, keep people employed. And if you don't want to create incentives where it's acceptable to fire or lay off a significant portion of the workforce, but you stop your 401k match. And so, as Troy mentioned earlier, I do think that that's where Treasury can write the rules so that those types of things can occur.
Yes, and I think it's, even though we hear these rumors that the program will be in place, potentially later this week, I think the Fed president for the Boston branch mentioned maybe mid-April, so it could be coming very soon. Nonetheless, it's not too late. If your company, for example, what a lot of companies have done, if you think you have specific circumstances or that might be unique to you, or that might represent a category of companies that you just feel that Treasury ought to be aware of as they're putting the fine points on these plans, we would encourage you to message that into Treasury, and we've got, feel free to reach out to Matt or me. We've got sort of a line. We've been sending some of these examples into Treasury or through your representative. We think there's still time to do that, and we would encourage people to do that.
And hey, Troy, can I jump in real quick here in terms of the advocacy, the work that you and Matt and others are doing to make sure that our congressional delegation is well informed so they can engage in the policy and the legislative process is critical. I also wanted to flag for everybody watching that as part of this federal committee that I talked about earlier, the third objective is to advocate for Utah policies and Utah businesses. And so when you think about the composition of this committee, we have everybody on the congressional delegation, all the offices, all of our federal partners here in Utah. We want to make sure that we are hearing from the business community what policy ideas should be there, what's working, what's not working, if there are specific issues for a company that we can engage in, we can bring that to the committee and then very quickly get that to everybody on our congressional delegation as well as our federal partners. They then can engage in their channels. And the effort is to the greatest extent possible, try to get all of us singing off of the same sheet of music. And if we do that, then we feel like we'll have a higher likelihood of moving the needle in a direction that will benefit Utah businesses. And so if anybody has any ideas, for one, Troy, Matt, we should get you looped in to that process because you're such a great source of expertise and you've got your pulse on the finger. You've got your finger on the pulse of the business community. And then for anybody else, you can reach out through World Trade Center Utah. We're happy to inject that into the process. info@WTCUtah.com, and we'll make sure we get those views represented. So Troy, back.
Awesome. No, thanks, Miles. And that is powerful. And in fact, I love that because, as I mentioned, some of the things that I know have been sent in, they go into what feels like a one-way communication. You're not really sure, what's being seen or heard. What Miles has just described is a strong team here in Utah that can give immediate feedback, and you've got powerful task force behind you. So I love that. That is great. Another question that I think we probably should have covered in an earlier slide, but let's go ahead and get to it here. Well, maybe a couple actually. So the question was asked or pointed out that by the time these details are figured out, let's say it's another week or two, most companies will have already made the tough decision to lay off people or reduce pay and hours. Will it be a time frame in which people could be hired back and still qualify for the loans? I think as we mentioned in response to another question, there is that time frame, 4 months after the crisis has passed. And then you'll have that amount of time in which to get back to those, to where you were before. And again, those are good faith certifications. So, companies are at the front end are promising in good faith that they believe they can get there and that they will try to get there. But these are not, obviously there are no real penalties if you don't in the end. Another question here, I assume these loans will be available for nonprofit organizations. If so, should faith-based organizations be concerned about maintaining religious freedom if they choose to accept one of these loans? And Matt, I know you're a constitutional scholar who is arguing for the Supreme Court, so you should take this one.
I don't think that's true, but I will tell you, I think the answer is no, but we don't have enough information on the programs and the rules from Treasury, but I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it is specifically made available to nonprofits. I think there's some language, there's some qualifier language to the extent possible, but we do know that the nonprofits are included in the targeted beneficiary audience. So another question, what is the likelihood that any of the loan conditions will be waived by the secretary? So here's the difficulty. The conditions, for example, and that's why it was drafted as good faith certifications, because if it's in the statute, the Treasury won't, the Secretary of Treasury won't have the power to waive those. But you'll see that compromise language in the statute to give some flexibility, pose them as, or presented them as good faith certifications. So we think that is where maybe waivers won't be involved, but there will be, a bit of flex in that. I do think companies on the front end, it won't just be about signing a certification. I think there'll be we'll see, but there might be a sense of a minimal amount of due diligence. We'll be able to show that, yes, they think they can get to that, and here's a good faith basis why. But I don't think there'll be waivers or really a necessity for waivers. Okay, so moving on, just wanted to try to clear up, and it may make it more confusing, to be honest, but there has been, you'll see a Main Street lending program that gets referenced a lot as well. And sometimes in the same breath as the mid-sized company loan program that we've been discussing. And technically they are, well, at the moment, technically they're different things. They may well converge into the same thing. But the Main Street lending program is a program that was announced by the Fed on March 23rd, so prior to the CARES Act being passed. And there, the Federal Reserve indicated a plan to sponsor a loan program with partner banks to support small and mid-sized companies. So sounds familiar, right? Sounds quite a bit like the program we've been describing. And in fact, there have been a couple of statements that have implied that they may be in the end the same thing, but we don't know. I think it'd be great if they're different. It might provide companies more options, but at the moment we don't know. Matt, anything I missed or any other thoughts you have on that?
No, I think that's accurate. My guess is that these will kind of merge into one, but we will just have to wait and see on that.
Yeah, good. So let's get to what I would say is the most important part of this presentation, and that is something that I know Matt has given a lot of thought to. It's what companies can do right now as we're waiting for these for the specifics to be rolled out. And so Matt, I'm going to just progress the slides here and over to you.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think it really is important, even though we don't have a lot of details yet. I think mid-sized companies need to be able to move quickly when those are announced and get the applications in. And so the first thing is obviously internal communication. If you have an independent board in the loop, you need to let them know what you guys are doing, lining up approvals, so that you can, if you need a board meeting, have them on standby, get that all prepared so that when this comes out, you can move quickly. And then you also have to make sure you're interacting with your senior management, HR, finance, tax, all of those groups, because what you want to avoid is HR or some other group doing something that might impact your eligibility. And you're going to want to reach out to them when you're making these certifications to make sure that you're aware of everything that's going on. So I would say internal communication is key. And then I think another preparation that needs to be done is analyzing your existing capital structure and your debt documents and facilities because you need to know what your debt capacity is, what your leverage ratios are, so that you can work with your banks to see where this program will fit in and whether you even need it. So if you have existing capacity under your revolver, it may be easier to just draw down on that and not be subject to these conditions, right? So really having a good handle on what your debt documents permit and what your capacity is also going to be key.
Hey, Matt,
Yeah.
on that point, does it make sense to actually start talking to your banks right now?
For sure. I think external communication with your lenders and investors is also should be going on right now, because in our view, the most likely lenders for this are going to be the banks that you already have existing relationships with. And we saw this a little bit with the small business program. I think they reversed course, but originally Bank of America was only issuing these loans to current borrowers. So it did not even ones that had bank accounts with them. They had to be current borrowers. And that changed, but I think what it highlights is that relationships are going to be key. And so if you haven't already, reach out to your bankers, try and figure out what they're hearing, talk with them, give them an idea of what you're thinking, so that once again, when the program comes out, you have everything in place to hit the ground running. And I'd say the same with major investors, right? I mean, if you're a big enough company that you have a investor relations department, they should be in the loop and know kind of what it is you obviously can communicate externally, but that's also a consideration. And then the last one that I want to talk about is current cash management activities. This question kind of came up previously, but I wouldn't wait on this program to decide what you're doing with managing your cash and the decisions you're going to make to run your business day to day, right? It may be hard to reverse some of these things, but I don't think it's impossible, and I don't think you want to wait unless we think it's imminent and it's going to come out in a couple of days. Okay, so maybe you wait a couple of days if it's not going to hurt what you're trying to do. But, I think companies have to be looking at things to manage cash. So those 401k, deferring those contributions, stopping your ESPP, doing temporary salary cuts. And I'd love to hear from the folks on the call as to what other things they're looking at. But in my view, I think I would continue down that path. And then if you have to change course, once the details of this loan program come out, I think it will be flexible enough to allow companies to do that.
Matt, on that point, it's and here's how this. I think it's very unlikely that the Fed will develop a program where it'll just hand it over to the partner banks to then go implement. The Fed will remain, Treasury will remain involved at some level. Congress has appointed a person or established, the president appointed the person, but the act establishes oversight by a sort of monitor. So to Matt's point about some of those tough decisions companies have to make, if it's a matter of reducing executive compensation so the company can keep more employees, you would think that that will be easy to sell, and that political piece of this whole structure, that's where you'll see that come into play. This is not a normal negotiation with banks. These other factors will be relevant. Okay, so what else might, if you have done all the things that Matt just walked through, and you're saying, what else can we do? What more can we do to make sure we're ready? Here is, and we almost didn't include this slide, and I'd like to hear sort of Matt's thoughts on how likely some of this is. But what this is a list of, not all of them, but several pieces that are in the application requirements that for the loans that are being made to airlines. Treasury posted these pretty early in the process, and you'll see they are putting those direct loans that are being made through. They want a lot of information. This is what proposed borrowers need to include in their application. So it's a lot. It's like their employment levels, describing the losses that they've had as part of coronavirus, describing their cash flow outlook. So if some of this or all of this is included in the final program, that obviously would be a challenge. And but for companies who want to cover all their bases, those are some some things you could see happening. I don't know, Matt, what do you think in terms of good use of resources?
Yeah, I mean, I think this one is a little tough, right? Because it basically is, where is this mid-sized program going to come out? Is it going to come out more like the SBA program, where it really is just some very basic certifications? Or is it going to be more like this slide where there's a lot of detailed information? My personal belief is, given that they're, the way that it's written to have these kind of certifications, I'm hopeful it comes out more on the side of the small business loans with not as much documentation. But, to the extent you can, I don't think it is bad to necessarily have this information available, right? Because maybe your banks will require it, or who knows. But I'm hopeful that the actual program requirements will not be as detailed as it is for the loans to airlines.
Yeah, I agree. I suspect it'll be somewhere in the middle, but ideally farther over towards where it was for the small business loans. But I think I would suggest that companies just again I said political before, I should have said governmental. The governmental overlay to all this. You're not just persuading your banks that you're a good loan bet. You're persuading them that you're a good candidate for this program, which is meant to preserve jobs. It's meant to preserve business so that America can get started again once it gets through the crisis. So when you dust off your investor deck and your presentation, think about things like how is this loan going to help you keep jobs? It's normally not something you would put into an investor deck, but in this case, I think to have in your back pocket, I think it would make a lot of sense, again because of that governmental overlay, how it helps you keep jobs, how you've been impacted by this downturn, and why it is that this loan is sort of will make a difference for you and help you keep more people employed in the U.S. Okay. So this next slide, we've kind of actually finished up what we planned to talk about on the mid-sized company loan program. But before we get into this, if there are other questions, please, we'll get back to it, because that is the more important part of this. Matt, anything else that just sort of occurs to you that we sort of should have touched on but didn't?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. I think what I would just say is, I sound like a broken record. We don't have all the details, but there's a lot of things that companies can be doing now to prepare. And you're going to want to move quickly. So do those things, get ready. And they want to get this money out there. They look good. It helps the country. So this money is going to get distributed. And so the more you can do to prepare now, the better position you'll be in.
That's awesome. That's great. Get your financial information ready. Talk to your banks. Talk internally, and be ready to make a quick decision. I will say that the amount of money is limited. It remains to be seen if it's limited in the same way like the PPP was. It's an unlevered money. So that because those loans are basically forgiven by the government, the capacity for those was limited to the 340 something billion package, which we think will be expanded, and we'll mention that here in a minute. These loans, it's possible the Fed could use it to lever, like either as subsidies or to guarantee loans that banks make. So it could be that in this case, the 454 billion bucket is huge and allows people to do as much as the government to do as much as it wants, but we don't know that. So there could be that same bit of race to hurry and get in before it's gone. And I hate sort of trying to fearmonger, and I'm not, because I actually think there'll be plenty here, and people will be able to take their time, be deliberative, and work it through. But there is that possibility, not risk. Okay, so which brings us to this last slide, which is just for Oh, sorry, here's another question. Let's go to that. What is the probability that we will see some level of loan forgiveness similar to what we are seeing with the SBA loans? So I'll give my view, and Matt, let you have a crack at it. But I think it's specifically these loans are unlikely to be forgiven under the current legislation. They can't be forgiven. But as we're going to talk about, there'll be multiple stimulus bills potentially, so you could see that changing in the future. But at the moment, they're not allowed to be forgiven.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the point of these loans is really to help with kind of operational expenses and weather the storm. I don't foresee them being forgiven as based on what we currently know.
What I have seen are some proposals, some ideas being given to Treasury that would suggest, let's make these loans subordinated loans, which means that they are, really every other piece of debt you have gets paid off first before these do, and that the maturity time frame on them would go past the maturity of your existing facilities. And I don't, that if you look at it that way, you might never pay these back, right? I mean, because credit facilities continue to be, to be amended and reinforced and, replenished, and so they tend to go on forever and ever. So I don't know, Matt, I don't know if I got that exactly right, but I think you had actually forwarded me something you had seen along those lines, and if that's the case, it's almost as good as being forgiven because it's a loan that just goes out forever and ever, if that happens.
Yeah, I mean, I think subordination will be key for companies being able to take advantage of this, as we previously talked about. So I think that is a critical factor, but we just don't know for sure yet.
Yeah, that would be huge if that happens, but we'll see. Okay, well, we got a few minutes left, and we'll continue to monitor questions. But otherwise, just for fun, now is the time to speculate about what the next bill might look like. And will there be a next bill? Clearly there's a significant desire to do that. I put here on the slide a couple posts from, tweets from Chuck Schumer and Speaker Pelosi, where they, talk about wanting to do something very soon. I think that it is very likely that in the near future, you will see that the PPP funds being expanded. You see this tweet from Marco Rubio, where he suggests that later this week, they will look to expand that pool by another 200 to 250 billion. So I think that is, I think we'll see at least that. Beyond that, there's talk about, infrastructure. I don't see that happening in the near term. Everything I'm hearing, that would be sort of further out. Maybe even in a stimulus 5 or 6 package. Some people have been asking a lot about whether a package should include some sort of business interruption insurance that applies to pandemics. Most business interruption policies have carve-outs for viruses, et cetera. So that's an interesting idea that we've seen. We've seen proposals for incentives for essential workers. So you think about people working in manufacturing facilities, making medical devices, or people working in grocery stores. Maybe the government would provide some incentives for them to keep working if we get to a point where we worry about them being willing to still come in and do their jobs. I think that, okay, here's another question. Any notion as to when these mid-sized loans will be available or when banks will accept applications for them? And I think that that is, as we've been saying, we just, we think, I feel pretty good that by the end of the month, we'll have clarity on that process. Will they be available in the next week or two? I don't know. But the programs, I think, will be announced and rolled out with, I'd be shocked if by the end of next week we don't see something. Matt, what's your view on that?
Yeah, I think we'll see some details, end of this week, maybe beginning of next week, because everybody wants and needs to see what those details are so that businesses can plan accordingly. I think it will be a little bit slower rollout than the small business loans. So I think there will be a little bit more time to actually get those funds in the door, which is another reason why I don't think companies should stop their kind of cash management activities right now.
Excellent. Well, I think we'll wrap things up. And as we've said multiple times, please, we invite you to reach out to us, to reach out to the World Trade Center, to send questions in. And just wanted to again thank the World Trade Center for everything that they're doing for this platform. Matt, thanks for your time. And we'll with that, I think turn it back over to WTC or Hannah. Do we just end it, or whatever you say?
Thank you so much, Troy and Matt, for joining us, and thank you everyone who's watching. Please take the time to fill out the survey that should pop up in your browser as soon as you leave the call, just so that we know what you guys are liking to hear, what you aren't, so we can make these better in the future. Again, Troy, Matt, thank you so much. Have a great one.